All right.
What are your favorite kind of books? Do you like science fiction, romance novels, fantasy stories? Now, what if I had you think about Christian books? Now what do you think? Do you automatically think, oh, those would be boring? Not adventurous. I've read tons of books about, they're aimed for children, and they're books of morals. Don't lie, don't steal, share. Is it possible to have quality Christian literature for everyone that can be enjoyed by Christians and non-Christians alike? That brings us to the question, does Christianity add value to or devalue literature? I'm going to look at 3 different books to try to decide whether Christianity can add value to literature. My first book that I'd like to talk about is Paradise Lost by John Milton. This is a story in the form of a poem in which the author imagines the fall from Satan's point of view. He talks about the pride of Satan, which leads to Satan and his followers being repelled from hell. From heaven. It describes the agony of hell and Satan's risky attempt to regain heaven, which I personally thought the odds never seemed very good, personally. It also discusses God's unconditional love for the people that he created and Jesus' willing decision to sacrifice everything for the people that he loved and created. This story has obvious biblical themes, and that anyone with a basic knowledge of the first book of the Bible, Genesis, could recognize. Despite this, Paradise Lost has been revered for years as quality literature. It has been deemed an epic poem, and it is often studied in literature courses at university. The second book that comes to mind is Pilgrims Progress, which was written by John Bunyan. John Bunyan was a pastor who was frequently put in prison because he decided to preach the gospel, and that wasn't in line with the Catholic point of view. His story, Pilgrim's Progress, describes a man named Christian who realizes that his city, called the City of Destruction, was just that, doomed for destruction. So he sets off on this journey to find the celestial city. This story is full of symbolism. He encounters the Slough of Despond, which describes people who set off on their Christian journey, all enthusiastic, and then at the first sight of trouble, they turn back. He visits Paul's Beautiful, which was a place of rest. He had to travel through a forest of darkness where he couldn't see anything. He didn't feel God's presence, and he had to just keep going, even though he didn't understand what was going on. He had to travel through Vanity Fair, which was full of distractions and worldliness, and many, many people fell astray there. He also had to climb this hill with a burden on his back. It was invisible, and yet it was so heavy. No one could see it, but he felt it, and no one knew how to get it off. He tried and he tried, and he couldn't get it off, and yet it only fell off when he climbed up this hill and there was the cross. And as soon as he saw that cross, his burden, like a big rock, just fell off and tumbled down the hill, and it wasn't seen anymore. There are also several symbolic characters in this story, like hopeful, faithful, great heart, the prince, who symbolizes Jesus, and Christian himself, who represents a Christian. So this story symbolizes the Christian walk as a journey. It describes our fallen world, our burden of sin, the message of redemption. And yet, despite all these biblical themes, it has been a childhood favorite for hundreds of years. The last book I'd like to talk about is the Narnia Chronicles by C.S. Lewis. This is another childhood favorite about 4 siblings named Peter, Susan, Edmund, and Lucy, who are sent to live at a professor's house during World War II. As they were playing hide and seek one day, the youngest sibling, Lucy, finds a wardrobe. She climbs into the back of it thinking it's a perfect hiding spot, and yet she finds herself in this mysterious country called Narnia. Eventually, all 4 siblings find themselves in Narnia. But first, Edmund is found by the White Witch, and he believes that the White Witch is on the right side of things. So he goes off with her, tempted by the promise of power and sweets, anything he wanted. So the Pevensey siblings heard a prophecy about them, describing that they would be a part of overthrowing the White Witch and that they would someday rule Narnia. So the siblings decide to meet up with Aslan. When Edmund meets up with the rest of them, he finds out that he's been a traitor and he is doomed to death. Obviously, the Pevensey siblings are distraught. Now, all of a sudden, their brother is doomed to die and there's nothing they can do about it. However, Aslan decides to give up his life for Aslan's sake. When all seems lost, however, he comes back to life and he overthrows the White Witch, and all the Pevensey siblings rule Narnia. So this story talks about the reign of the White Witch. She rules in an eternal winter, which symbolizes the power of Satan on this earth. They talk about our sin, and we deserve to die because that's the penalty for our sin, just like Edmund was a traitor who was doomed to die. Jesus took our place. He sacrificed himself to save us from our sins, in the same way that Aslan sacrificed his life to save Edmund. And just like Jesus rose again with a big earthquake and the curtain ripped, that's what the Bible talks about, in the same way, when Aslan rose again, there was a huge earthquake that shook the rock that he was lying on, and it cracked in two. So, again, this is a childhood favorite. It's very commonly known, and yet most people don't realize that it was written by one of the greatest Christian authors of all time, who also wrote Mere Christianity and the Screwtape Letters. So, does Christianity add value to or devalue literature? The answer is yes. Without authors like Milton, John Bunyan, and C.S. Lewis, we would have missed out on some of the greatest books in English literature. Thank you.
Awesome. I loved your examples, really strong, because those are really super well-known books throughout all history.
Yeah.
Yeah, good job. And of course, well-spoken as usual. Oh, did I stop it?